Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us today, and for those that are watching us virtually. I'm super excited to be part of this amazing group of leaders. I'm honored to be part of the conversation, and I really hope that we can raise awareness on an invisible population that it's making all of us better with their efforts and their amazing championships across the world. With today's conversation, we also want to invite more investors, more entrepreneurs, more NGO leaders to consider joining, again, what we believe is part of just a great solution that we all have been waiting for. With that said, I want to give a few minutes for the panelists to introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about kind of your solutions, who you are, what you're doing. And then I'm going to start with, after that, with just a question that I think will set the table for us to have a great conversation. And I'll prompt Wakisha and Jessica with a very interesting question related to what COVID has exposed not only student parents, but all parents to just adapt and struggle with our own kids as well as we try to work remotely and in the offices. So with that said, Jessica, is it okay if I start with you?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Jessica Rothenberg-Aalami, the CEO and founder of CellEd. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm honored to represent and participate with a team where our goal is to bridge some of the most significant skills divide for those who need it most. And we really do this by making accessible microlearning available to all and co-design with our users. That's been our mission and mandate from the beginning. It's pretty simple with 3-minute audio text messages that's stacked to a certificate. A single mom who's also a learner and working can gain access to a FAFSA form, understand what to navigate in terms of daily life on her terms. So honored to be here and look forward to more conversations.
Thank you, Jessica. Wakisha?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wakisha Wilkerson. I am the Director of Coaching for CellEd. I work alongside Jessica with supporting some of our most vulnerable learners in the upskilling space. In addition to being the Director of Coaching, I'm also a current undergraduate student at Sacramento State University, earning my bachelor's degree in psychology. And my most important title is I'm a single mom of 3 amazing kids, age ranges from 15, 7 years old, and 6 years old. And I'm really honored to be a part of this discussion today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Helene. I'm the founder and CEO of EDQUITY. Our goal at EDQUITY is to narrow equity gaps in post-secondary completion by streamlining access to the safety net for students in crisis. And particularly our focus is streamlining access to emergency cash assistance. So we provide an end-to-end emergency aid administration technology solution, which includes an equitable application, a decisioning framework, payment to students, and reporting, with the goal of making these programs perform in a way that's much faster, much more equitable, and much more effective to help students complete. As we think about this work, we know that student parents are disproportionately in the population of students that are needing access to critical resources. So I'm very, very excited to be a part of this conversation with these amazing leaders on this issue.
Hi, good morning. My name is Melvin Hines. Thank you all for having me on this stage. I am the product of 2 student parents, born in South Georgia. I was traveling with them when, pre-internet days, we were having to, drive 45 minutes to the nearest college in order for them to complete their degree. And my experiences there led me to want to start an organization that today is called Upswing. We work with around 70 colleges around the country to really help to support particularly student parents, online students, first gen, basically people who sometimes tend to fall through the cracks within our higher educational system. 26% of our students today are student parents, and We're really, excited to be here to share what we've been learning, as well as ideally help to, as Louise said, uplift the focus of this conversation throughout this conference. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all. As I was saying, we were having a fantastic preparation call, and it just struck me that suddenly we all became, from one day to another, parents that needed to juggle a lot of things once the pandemic hit. And as I look at the lives of student parents, including my mom, that's the daily life from a student parent, right? It's not, and then the pandemic became even kind of a wave of worse energy specifically for student parents, but for all of us. As you think about this, and I'll look at you, Wakisha and Jessica, I think you might be, and student parents might be, some of the best teachers for all parents right now that are experiencing juggling so many things and still trying to excel at what they are trying to do. Do you have any words of advice, any words of wisdom of how do we keep it up?
I think the pandemic was twofold in being tragic, but also inspirational in the way that resources were allocated so quickly for those who needed them most. It was amazing how all of a sudden the children in my neighborhood now all had access to Chromebooks immediately. We all were given emergency access to internet. Employers, now all of a sudden it's okay to work from home and remotely, and there's devices for us to do those things now, and they figured it out very quickly when profits were being affected, if workers couldn't make it into the office. So I think what needs to be at the forefront is keeping those flexible options available for everyone. As we can see, a lot of us benefited from being able to work remotely or have access to our children throughout the day. But as you mentioned, we've been doing it for a very long time with less resources. And I think that moving forward, that's what needs to be heard. And then the other thing that I also wanted to touch on is that what works for me doesn't work for my peer. I think the most important thing to keep in forefront is being able to have various options for what works for people's lifestyles. Quit trying to fit people into the system and start finding ways to make the system fit into people's lives.
I would say, although our experiences are so different, something we definitely share, Wakisha and I, we were working parent students. The key word is working, and the other key word is parent. And full disclosure, I was on my own at 15, so I was a working student through high school. I was a working student through college, and then I was a working parent through graduate school. And what I found stunning is that there was no one to ask, no one to go to, nobody to say, hey, my basic wage for my job plus this little disbursement check from financial aid doesn't cover the cost of childcare. So how am I supposed to get to class and juggle it, and who do I ask? And I kept getting, go to the next door. So my memory is standing in that long financial aid line. I always tell people my first degree and several degrees later was in mastering the financial aid system, and the amount of time that took and all the privileges I had to have to read the endless forms, to navigate financial terms, legal docs, extraordinary. So when I think of parent learners, I think of moms, because I was standing in a line and I didn't see many that had the child on the front and back, had the two children, long line to get a disbursement check that couldn't cover childcare. And then how are we supposed to get the next step? And that's 20 years ago. And when I talked to Wakisha, not much has changed.
I think what's also so important for us to highlight is there has been so many conversations about workforce and the future of work, and we continue to hear from employers, oh, what we need is grit, what we need is social skills, what we need is problem-solving skills. Well, I think it's clear that some of these assets have been practiced from an early age from some of the examples that we just heard, right? So how do we continue to elevate the amazing asset that we have amongst us, and we elevate that and provide opportunities which will benefit all? So with that, David, Melvin, I'll start with both of you. Tell me a little bit about how you are designing solutions that are helping addressing this need, but also how important it is for you both to elevate the user voice and the customer voice, and how are you keeping kind of that feedback loop into your solutions?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, Luis. So one of the things that we practice at EDQUITY is not user-centered design, which is a common trope in the tech community, but equity-centered design. And what this means is actually bringing the end user into the design process itself. So doing co-building with the demographics of students that we're trying to serve. So we actually have brought student parents into our design sessions with our designers to make sure that the framework for the solution that we're building is going to meet their needs. I think one of the critical things that Wakisha pointed out is not everyone has the same schedule. In fact, everyone's schedule is quite different, and the institution needs to be designed to be able to serve all of those students, particularly given that most are working, right? So one is not able to go into a financial aid office between 9 and 5 because of class, childcare responsibilities, and working responsibilities. And in fact, what we see in our application behavior is that close to 40% of applications that are submitted are between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. So what we're seeing is that student parents are doing their work deep into the hours of the night because these are the hours that are free to them, so making sure that you're thinking about designing around these schedules, designing around these needs is really important. The other thing that we do that I think is really critical is the historical paradigm of emergency aid is sort of grounded in the poorhouse, right? And some of the stigmas that emerge from these legacy practices of how we think about poverty in this country, where there's a lot of stigma and judgment that goes into how we think about awarding aid. What we do at EDQUITY is we're not asking why folks need help. We're asking the objective conditions that they're experiencing, right? Acknowledging that when financial aid offices are processing awards, they're doing so against a cost of attendance that, for the most part, is actually 30% below what the true cost of attendance is for any student. Understanding that a large percentage of the students that come into college are fundamentally insolvent, right? So understanding that many students are dealing with poverty, right, and not judging them for it or blaming them for it, but just acknowledging and trying to see their experience and use that for the determination of decisions that we make. That's a way that we also try to build for that end user.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. You know, you were talking about elevating the voice, and Wakisha, you were saying that as well. I think that that's something that we all really need to put a lot more impetus on, put a lot more focus on. You know, I remember when I went to college, you know, at University of Georgia, it was a really big deal. I was in a small town called Albany, where most people, you know, weren't really going off to the flagship institutions. And all of a sudden, I was in the midst of this 30-something thousand campus that is majority white, and I'm this student who doesn't know anything about how to navigate anything. And the last thing that I wanted to do was show that I didn't know these things, show that I was nervous, show that I was scared. Even if there was a financial aid office that was available, what would I look like being the one person walking into this building where everyone knows it's a financial aid office? What we've seen at Upswing is that those same fears, those same concerns, they take place with student parents as well. There was one particular student who just really strikes out in my mind from the very beginning of COVID, where our virtual assistant, Anna, sends a message out, hey, don't forget that FAFSA registration's coming up really soon. You know, please make sure to get this done pretty soon and let me know if you need any help. And the student replied back and said, well, I already applied for FAFSA, but I'm dropping out. And so we reached out and said, well, you know, why is that? Is there anything we could do to help? And this is when all of a sudden she just replied with a litany of everything that had taken place since COVID. The fact that she had lost her job, the fact that she suddenly had 2 kids who were at home as well with no laptop in order to connect to their classes. The fact that she was supposed to be an on-campus student and suddenly she can't get in touch with her professors. These were all the things she was dealing with in silence because she had no idea how to solve this issue and whether or not the school even cared that this was an issue she was dealing with. And so as we're thinking about, especially as EdTech entrepreneurs, how do we create better products, how do we create better tools, we have to make sure that their voices are here as well. And so I'm really excited that Wakisha's here on this stage as well, because it is so critically important that these voices are here, that we're making sure that they're included in the development process, and that we're just asking the questions instead of assuming what the answers are.
I'd like to interject really quickly. I really appreciate how both David and Melvin have mentioned the student voice being present and being uplifted during these conversations. But I think what's really even more important is that the student voices are being heard by the people who have the power to make decisions. And those voices include your faculty, they include your administrators, they include your frontline staff. I have a really quick story I'll share about my experience on my 3rd attempt at trying to attend community college a few years ago. And I had enrolled in a local community college in Los Angeles where they offered and they promoted a program that was accelerated for working adults. And I enrolled in the classes that I needed, and I had, of course, to visit the financial aid office to turn in documents. I was working full-time. I was a newly single mother of 3. I lived about an hour away from work and about 30 minutes from my college from work. So I requested an extended lunch to go and turn in my documents, respectively, to the financial aid office, and I was missing one document that was at home. And it was a copy of a document. And during that process, I found the document. I emailed my advisor for financial aid. Can I just email this document to you? Can I just attach it, send it back? And the response I got back was very surprising. It was no, you need to come into our campus. It's summer, we have alternative hours. We're closed on Friday. That's the only way you can turn in this copy of this document. I had to escalate my issue all the way to the Dean of Students to get approval to email a copy of a document back to financial aid for a program that was marketed as a program that was for working adults to be accelerated through college in 2 years. And I mention this story often, because had I not had perseverance, had I not been determined, had I not known that no is just find the right person to ask, I would have quit and dropped out of school before I even started. And that's why I think it's important for frontline workers to be trained. If you're offering a program that should be accessible for working adults, then everyone on the campus needs to be aware of that so that they can make accommodations. And I think that it's really important that those decision makers are also present during those conversations.
Thank you, Wakisha. It's just, thank you for those stories, because they bring to life what we're discussing here, right? It's the challenge it's real. I was chatting with David a little bit before the panel and yesterday on when there's supports or when there's commitment from higher levels that yes, we will be flexible, or there will be money for emergency aid. That's just the first step, right? There's a lot of other work that needs to happen across the organization, across the structure, to make sure that everybody is aligned and everybody is kind of willing to then support that pledge. With that said, and understanding that we have a platform for many to hear, what are some of the calls to action that you would like to kind of just provide? And let's think about policymakers, let's think about advocates, even entrepreneurs or capital providers. Jessica, I'll start with you.
I think I would say believe what your parent learners are telling you. I think that's our greatest challenge at CellEd, having been co-created with the populations that not only we serve, but our team. And when we share something we're excited about, a course on essential skills to navigate work, or another course on something that has been demanded and asked for by these learners and want to have input on making them meaningful, the administrator or the gatekeeper or the other person is like, but why? We've got this. And then we say, well, most people are so busy, they're not necessarily on internet, they're not necessarily on a computer, and in fact, it needs to be designed for their real life. And we constantly get that. There couldn't be that many people without internet at home. Why would you have a call-in option over cellular phone back in 2014? Why did you make it audio two-way texting that stacks to a certificate without internet? That's why. And after the hidden epidemics were no longer hidden with COVID-19, I think the call is this evidence, this experience is there. It's just when and how are we going to grab it and go to where we need to make it a more equitable and equal system, especially for one that isn't built for equity and equality at its core.
Thank you, Doctor. Go ahead, Wakisha.
I think the call to action for systems in particular is to be creative, to understand that, yes, the solution is to add more robust course offerings for students. Yes, the solution is to advance technology and making it more accessible through digital options for students. Yes, the option is to create more competency-based education options for students. All of those are yes. There's not a one-size-fits-all, because we're not a monolithic of student parents. We have intersections in race, we have intersections in socioeconomic status, we have intersections of our our status of career. So I think that there can't be just one particular focus on how to advance the completion rates for student parents. It has to be all.
And I would say that, when we think about some of the calls to action, there's sort of the what can you do now and what you can do for the long term. And if we're talking about what you can do now, I think Jessica mentioned this, there's a leadership shift that needs to occur. So I'll call out Russell Lowry Hart, who is a president that we work with. Russell has been championing what he calls a culture of caring for a long time at Amarillo College, right? And this is a fundamental shift that shifts the entire culture of the organization around poverty, right? It's an acknowledgement that disproportionately a number of students that attend Amarillo College are dealing with poverty. And the expectation of no excuses is not sort of like the charter school no excuses for students. It's no excuses for faculty, right? It's no excuses that everybody on the who works for the college needs to know that they have designed an advocacy and resources center that's meant to centralize supports for students. And while the faculty don't need to be social workers, they need to know that they have social workers on campus and where to point students, right? And this isn't a cure-all by any means, but it is setting a tone that normalizes helping students, not sort of creating bureaucratic friction points that could lead to attrition, right? It's really meant to identify and direct supports to students as much as possible. And leaders across the country need to be doing this and embracing these changes to try to incrementally move the needle. But that's not enough, right? What's needed is structural change. And I am heartened to see that the Biden administration, in the American Families Plan, there are calls to action around, universal child care and also increasing allocation. $62 billion was proposed for community colleges for student supports explicitly around basic needs. James Cavall, who was just approved, I believe, today, and he's stepping into this position of Undersecretary for Higher Education. James has talked about creating an Office of Basic Needs, right? So these are things where we're starting to see and recognize the experience of students and student parents, right? Understanding that once upon a time, childcare was not considered in cost of attendance, right? Well, if you look at the 30,000 applications from student parents that we've gotten in the past 2 months, 50% of them indicate that childcare is an issue, right? And 10% is a 10 percentage point difference between housing insecurity for student parents and non-student parents, right? So starting to consider these other structural factors and costs that are very real to students and need to be incorporated into how we finance higher education.
I think for me, the call to action would be a little bit probably more focused on, I think, some of the things that we see happening here at ASU+GSV. You know, it's really good to see a huge focus on online students. You know, since COVID, what are we doing to help to impact the service models, things like that. But I think that, you know, the fact is that online students and their concerns and you know, student parents and everyone else have had these issues for years. We all knew that they've had them for years, and yet, you know, it took a pandemic and a ton of money flowing into education for people to kind of, you know, open their eyes to say, hey, this is something we need to focus on. I think that we really need to have a much larger and keener focus on the communities that are underserved within higher education, underserved within the K-12 community, regardless of whether or not we're in a pandemic, regardless of whether or not suddenly outside investors are interested in this space, because that is the tail that wags the dog. That is what determines whether or not, you know, and we're all, you know, we're all entrepreneurs and in ed tech companies, so we certainly see it, and I know these guys, investors, and fortunately we all have investors that, you know, are really keen on, you know, a double impact, but that's not everyone. And so if you're being told that, you know, I had a conversation actually with someone else here at one of the larger universities who was saying that, you know, what they've recognized is that the types of students that we're talking about supporting here today are not the ones that scale easily, right? You have to help them with technology. You have to help them with financial aid and things like that. And so it's not gonna always, you know, accrue to some ridiculously high valuation in 2 years. We have to be willing to accept that and understand that it's important for us to do this anyway. And I think that that's what I would have as our call to action here at ASU+GSV today.
I think you're raising a very interesting point, Melvin, because it seems that the pandemic has been here forever, right? It's just a different pandemic that it helps us kind of elevate the status that we haven't been able to solve as a society. And as at Imaginable Futures, I think with the leadership of Venice, who couldn't be here to moderate this panel, but I'm thankful and grateful that I'm able to step up for her. When we speak to other funders, foundations, investors, the question that we get is like, okay, so what's the kind of short-term return, and how do we see the immediate impact? And the push that we're trying to make is the long-term impact will be much higher than what you can see in a year from now. And the need is huge. So we need more. We need more philanthropists. We need more investors. We need more stories from student parents to be elevated, to inspire. How can each of your platforms, and I'll start with CellEd, how are you collecting those narratives, Dr. Jessica, and how might we help to elevate some of those inspiring examples to support policymakers and to support leaders? And I think I'm trying also to call on other investors and other foundations to see what we have between the 3 organizations that are sitting here, and see how those stories can also help us with movement building, because we need more support.
I would say I think I'll speak for myself. I'm humbled every day by what we learn through feedback from our learners on the system and the coaches that have this long-term partnership with them. That's complemented by, you know, essentially automated courses you have available 24/7, along with the coaching and the nudging. So the combination of the live touch, that two-way communication connection, is how we get the feedback, and the partners that serve them on what would work better for them if they need to reach and engage and improve. So the feedback is what works well and even better if. And the quotes, the stories, the pain points that we get in real time through every text. Imagine how many texts are sent in a 20-hour audio text course. And when we have folks on the system since day one, coaches on our team from day one back in 2012, a lead coach, Pilar, etc. The stories grow, we learn, and we get the feedback, and that is what feeds our design. So I would say it is that critical to get that two-way communication daily, that data, that analytic, that input to improve.
I think the return on investment over the long term is very significant. It's exponential, actually, because you think of the investment not in just the student, but in the student's family. And as I think about the stories of my peers whose families, the trajectory of their lives has been changed through education, I think that's why the investment is so crucial for people to start looking at the student parents. Since we're such a growing population, 1 in 5 students in U.S. colleges are student parents, and of those, over 50% are women, and a majority of those are Black women. So I think that as we invest in the education of student parents, we, by proxy, invest in the advancement of Black women, particularly who have been so marginalized over the history. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's such a significant need for that investment.
Yeah, I would fully agree. And to piggyback on what Jessica was saying about data, I mean, the way that EDQUITY's application works is we are literally screening for basic needs and security, among other things, right? So the Hope Center for College Community and Justice, which is the nation's leading research and advocacy center on this topic, has been doing this work for years. I mean, we're talking about 5-10 years of data collection, data dissemination, basically, screaming at the top of their lungs that this issue has been here. But there has been somewhat of a skepticism around that data until quite recently to accept that this is the reality of higher education, right? And one of the things that we're doing is that we're, bearing this out and proving it to be true, right? I mean, we've accepted 70,000 applications in the last 60 days. Of that, nearly 60% of students are experiencing housing insecurity, right? Which is right in line with what the Hope Center for College Community and Justice has been telling us for years. So I think there's an onus on companies like ours to take that data and then do research, right? To prove that the intervention model is the right one, right? We've seen cash transfer studies and other verticals that demonstrate that folks who need money, well, the best thing that you can do for them is give them the money that they need. And those are the types of studies that we're running at EDQUITY to try to move the lever on broader state and federal policies. But the last thing I'll say, and to pick up on what Luis was saying, I mean, once upon a time, I think ASU and GSV, this conference, sort of conflated education and impact as sort of, it's education, thus it's impact, which is, one perspective. I think, fortunately, that perspective has been evolving so that there is more of a narrow definition of what impact is. But I do think that there should be a burden on the investment community to define that transparently, right? So if you do call yourself an impact firm, fantastic. How do you measure that explicitly? Like, what are the criteria that you're actually collecting to demonstrate that you are living as an impact firm? And I think that there are many who are moving into the ESG space, into the impact space, who are able to sort of piggyback on that wave of goodwill. And we're grateful for every investor that steps into this space. But I do think that there needs to be greater accountability, right? There needs to be some sort of transparent metrics around how you're measuring that and what makes you an impact investor.
Amen. When we're talking about the stories and how to get them to bubble up, I think that's a big part of what fortunately we've been able to do at Upswing because of we have our virtual assistant that is communicating back and forth with students. We have people who are empowering those as well and utilizing them to help make sure those stories come to the top. And it's helped already inform the things that we've done on our platform. I'm sure a lot of people here have seen the importance and increasing need of mental health and wellness since COVID, but early on we were noticing those trends because of how students were replying to us. Unfortunately I guess I should say fortunately, we had a circumstance where a student actually reached out because they were considering killing themselves. And, we, were fortunate in that circumstance to be able to reach out to the proper authorities that went to their house before anything terrible happen, these are the missing stories. These are the untold stories that we need to make sure are percolating to the top, that are getting to the right people at the right time, in a manner that's going to, ensure that we're not just making sure people graduate, but we're making sure that people are healthy and that they live. And so, that's a big part of how we see our mission here at Upswing. We actually had a panel not too long ago, just like this, with our internal team that was, included student parents and other non-traditional students who were telling their stories. And one in particular said, I was just so elated. I never thought that anyone would ever care what I think. And that, that really struck a chord with me, because we really, do have that missing gap sometimes. We need to make sure that we're connecting with these underserved students.
Thank you, Melvin. Wakisha, the next question, and it might be the last question. This one is directed to you. If you had a magic wand, what would you change about your experience in pursuing your degree?
If I had a magic wand, that's a good question, Luis, and it opens up a lot of doors for me. I think what I would change about my experience would be that I would want to feel like I belonged on campus. I hadn't quite experienced that until my experience with Coastline Community College, but all of my other experiences at all the other community colleges, I really felt like I just didn't fit in. I really felt like the services were not created for me. I really felt like there were a lot of gatekeepers that weren't providing me the information. So if I had a magic wand to change that, I would change the inclusivity of student parents and the experience of college. And I'll give you an example of how Coastline College actually made me feel more welcome than any of the other colleges. They were just so accommodating. I wanted to have a college experience. Although I was a student parent, I know a lot of us are experiencing time poverty, so we want to get in and get out. I particularly enjoyed having the experience of being able to be a part of the Associated Student Body, and they made that happen for me. They allowed me to attend meetings digitally. I was able to turn in documents for financial aid remotely. I had many experiences where there wasn't a consideration that I had children, so a lot of spaces weren't welcoming. They didn't have things for the children to do while I'm handling things in the admissions office. And I really wish that all campuses across the country really took the perspective of that you're not just teaching high school graduates, you're also educating families. You're educating people who are raising families, people who have careers that are in process. I don't know the exact statistics, but there are so many people who have some college experience, but not enough. So not everyone is a first-time college student. But that's what I would do. I would make things more accessible. I would love to have more advocates on campus. In financial aid, I always felt like if I didn't know the right question to ask, I was not going to get the assistance and support. And I know so many who are not advocates for themselves. They haven't mastered that skill the way that I have. So I always feel like I'm that voice for those people who don't have the tenacity yet to advocate on their own behalf.
Thank you. And thank you for your continued leadership, to the four of you, because we need more Wakishas, we need more Davids, we need more Dr. Jessicas, we need more Melvins. And it's a real honor for Imaginable Futures to partner with each of you. And again, we need more support, we need more help, and we need more student parents to be inspired by the stories that we're hearing today, because they can provide a much more brighter future, not only for the country, but for the families of this country. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this conversation, and please join the movement, and please direct funding, direct support, entrepreneurs that are out there creating solutions to support higher ed and student parent populations. You just heard amazing insights from Wakisha of what are the things that you need to focus on. So with that, please join me in thanking the panel today.